Your Turn to Die is a game that has been in constant development with each new chapter launch. Starting way back in 2017, YTDD has evolved over the course of the last 5 years, with the final chapter launching very soon. During its many stages of development, there have obviously been many assets used for its creation. Along with those utilized assets, there have been many unused assets and dialogue scenes that didn't make it into the final game. Some of these unused assets Naki Dai has shown off himself, however some of the fandom has come together to decipher on their own, those not shown off by Naki Dai. A combination of these unused bits includes scenes, CGs, assets, etc. Basically anything that didn't make it into the final product. It is worth noting, however, there is one more chapter to look forward to, so maybe some of these will be reused in the future. For now though, they remain as unused. So let's check them out. Now friends, before we start the video, I should point out that a lot of unused dialogue involves subtle changes that don't impact much. For example, the first main game includes a few changes in word choice from characters like Kyutaro and Shin that in the end lead to the same outcome. I won't be including all of those, but other, more impactful scenes will be covered. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Starting off with Chapter 1-1, we have nothing, at least according to the wiki. Considering how 1-1 is the most beta that Kimi ga Shine is going to get, I can see how nothing much was really changed. However, there are some things to look over in 1-2. Similar interaction to that of 1-2's pre-chapter Mishima and Now scene. This one shows the two in what seems to be a time right before the start of the death game. It involves a relatively wholesome interaction between Now and Mishima. It starts off with the two driving together, and Now looking tired. Mishima offers her some tea, to which she accepts. He mentions how this was a gift from a friend overseas, and that it was a very special kind of tea. We then move to the part where Mishima refuses to read the packaging. Which gives us a further look into his traits, explaining how he never really wants to be influenced by things like prices or ingredients. He also expresses how he would, and I quote, like to enjoy the one tea 2 times. Which, in my opinion, just sounds like some broken English. This gives us a further insight into the eccentric side of Mishima's personality. Upon drinking the tea, Now notices how it tastes off, and both her and Mishima realize that it wasn't actually tea, but tonkatsu soup. Moral of the story, folks? Read your packages. Moving on to Chapter 2, we have a lot more to cover. Starting off, the beginning cutscene that introduces us to Hallucination Joe doesn't actually show the boogeyman that we all hate. It was originally meant to be a pretty wholesome interaction of Joe and Sarah during their normal school lives. It starts off similar to the original scene of 2-1, where Joe asks to see Sarah's homework. She declines, leaving Joe disappointed. With the absence of Hallucination Joe, the scene goes on for a bit longer than the used one. Sarah states how Joe's phone is distracting him from his work and offers to take it off his hands in exchange for her homework. Joe's worried that without his phone, he might miss a message from Ryoko, his girlfriend. Then Sarah mentions something about Joe being the perfect man and his stock never dropping something in more broken English. During this scene, we actually get some dialogue from the two's teacher, who calls Sarah and Joe's conversation a lover's quarrel, and for them to take it into the hallway. They apologize, and it then cuts to the two walking home. Joe jokes that next time he'll take away Sarah's phone as karma. Sarah says she'd be fine with that, which surprises Joe. She states how she would never ask Joe for homework, though. Sarah then mentions just how good of a guy Joe is, which gets him all flustered. Okay, so small editor's note I wanted to make here. I think the Joe spray I just inserted into the scene here was actually made for this specific scene I'm describing right now, because it is an unused spray that I am using for this part, and the scene we're describing right now has Joe becoming flustered, so maybe this flustered spray went with this scene, which would be cool, because I kind of just did that on impulse considering the fact that it fits so well, and I just kind of made that connection now, so I'm putting it in here. Okay. Back to the video. He points out how it's cheeky of Sarah to say that with a straight face, and mentions how she'd be a good boss lady one day. Joe runs off to get a kebab, and Sarah follows after him. Guess Naki Dai decided to go more brutal with the scene in the end, which makes sense considering this is a horror death game after all. That said, it's still sad to think that we lost such a cute scene. I think the final product does good as an introduction to the second chapter though. We then transition to the actual death game. Similar to the introduction of Chapter 2, we start off by playing as Shin. Except this time, it isn't a dream sequence. He and Kana are seen going around the facilities, interacting with various other members of the cast. They approach Gin, who refers to them as Loner Number 1 and Loner Number 2. What did we tell you about bullying, Gin? Shin points out that he's pretty hated, which Kana says is natural. He doesn't understand this, as he believes he's worked hard for everyone's sake so far. I believe this indicates that Shin had already woken up from his quote-unquote attack at the beginning of 2-1, and is currently putting on his whole amnesiac act that he would in the final game. We end up playing in the POV of Shin for longer than we do in the final product. Him and Connor are seen next talking to Alice. This is replaced in the final game with Sara going up to him instead. It's almost the exact same interaction, except with Shin's dialogue options instead of Sara's. Alice basically stays the same here. When Reiko steps into the scene, there is some dialogue to take note of. Shin asks how Sara is doing. Reiko is understandably annoyed at Shin, and mentions how satisfied he must be after his actions in the previous main game. She states how there's nothing she can do for Sara, but that the only way she can help is with her singing. Shin advises Reiko to get some rest, but Reiko shuts him down by stating that she has to be around to keep an eye on him. Shin explains that he would never do anything bad, which again is him playing into the Amnesia Act. Kana is worried for Alice, and we get a few new, or maybe just mistranslated, dialogue options. You can respond to Shin by either saying, "Has Miss Reiko always been this scary?" Or, "Does Miss Reiko hate men?" This would imply that he believes Reiko is a feminist. When choosing the first option, Alice will respond by asking if Shin thinks she is scary too, implying that others have thought the same thing. When choosing the second option, he will just respond by saying, "Men." This is pretty funny. Just men. The conversation then continues on as it does in the final game, but we get an amusing response from Shin, with him asking if Reiko was, quote-unquote, nice to men before. That's pretty much where our playing as Shin comes to an end. Instead of moving back into the POV of Sara, like we would in the final game, we jump into the eyes of our friendly policeman, Keiji Shinogi, something we wouldn't normally do until Chapter 3. The scene is set up exactly the same as the previously mentioned Shin view. Alice is watching Reiko when Keiji comes over to him. He asks why Alice is hiding, but he retaliates by claiming he's allowed to be wherever he pleases. Two dialogue options come up here. One has Keiji stay silent, but the other has him ask Alice why he doesn't want to talk to Reiko. He, like in the final game, explains how him and Reiko are complete strangers. Keiji calls him stubborn for this. Like during the Shin POV, Reiko notices the two watching her and confronts them. Keiji asks how Sara is doing, to which Reiko gives the same responses as before. Differentiating dialogue pops up when Alice asks for Keiji's thoughts on Reiko. There are three choices here. The first option has Keiji point out how she seems harsh on men, to which Alice doesn't say much in response. The second option has Keiji say that he likes her and her strong will. This prompts Alice's brotherly instincts to kick in, and he mentions how if Keiji were to ever lay a hand on Reiko, he would, quote-unquote, bring him within an inch of his life. Calm down there, Kratos. Keiji says how Reiko would do the exact same thing. The third option has Keiji mention how she's not a bad person, but she can be scary. Alice seems confused by this. The scene carries out similarly to Shin's view, until Keiji brings up Alice's murder case. He then mentions the victim, so Hiyori, and a callback to Chapter 1's final scene. That brings this interaction to an end. The beta version of Chapter 2 brings us a lot more content through the eyes of Keiji than we normally get. Usually, we wake up as Sara from Nightmares of Hallucination Joe. This time, however, we come into her room as Keiji and catch her waking up from said nightmares. The scene basically plays out the same, though I assume we could see a few Sara sprites during this interaction, which would actually be pretty cool. This next scene is an altered version of the interaction involving Joe's keychain in the medical office. We normally walk in as Sara and notice the hidden accessory that Gin is holding onto, but this was originally going to be another scene played out in Keiji's POV. It starts out with Kyutaro warning Gin that it's dangerous to act alone. He ignores the caution and goes to talk to Keiji. He asks Gin what the problem is, and he presents the dog keychain. Gin asks if he should give it to Sara, and three dialogue options come up. The first one is Keiji mention that it's important to Sara and recommends giving it. Gin grows a bit scared of the idea, but will continue to comply anyway. The second option has Keiji give it to her instead, and the keychain is added to your inventory. The third option has Keiji advise against giving it to Sara. Gin is hesitant at first, but Keiji offers to hold on to it. Choosing this also has the keychain added to your inventory. Kyutaro urges Gin to go stay with Reiko and Now, but he retaliates by saying he doesn't want to be ordered around, and that Kyutaro is only dragging him down. We get one final line from Keiji, that being a thought from him that goes as follows.
Sheesh. Going at it alone.
This leads me to believe that this scene leads into Gin discovering the secret passageway from floor 3 to floor 1. If this is true, that would mean that Kyutaro and Keiji knew that Gin was about to do this. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense though. Why would Keiji and Kyutaro allow him to attempt something so dangerous when they're very capable of stopping him? Let alone not tell anyone else. Questions that we can't exactly get an answer to currently. I'm going to include this here, but there's a small section where Sara encounters Alice alone in the monitor room. He seems to be lost in thought, and Sara walks away not wanting to disturb him. This comes with an unused map file known as Zizio, which we don't have an actual image of, so I'll be providing a visual of what it could look like here. We all know the memory erasing machines the Fallen uses on several members of the cast in Chapter 2. Sara, Alice, and Reiko specifically. But in the beta version, she was never meant to have access to such a device. This leads to an interaction between Keiji and Sara. They discuss how So's amnesia could be fake, which is present at this point in time, and how if they were to lose all of their memories, it could be a possibility that the kidnappers somehow took and sold them. From the context, they seem to mention how the memory erasing device would store said memories and they'd be sellable from there. Keiji objects to this and says how there's no machine out there that could do such a thing. In the final version of Chapter 2, this is obviously proven wrong. Mr. Policeman makes one final remark about how if them, the participants, were programmed AI, that the task would be made possible. Now, it is questionable how the device in the final version actually connects to the human brain, so could this lead to a speculation that the participants are actually AI? That would lead to the whole, is this story we're playing through right now just another simulation theory? We can't see what scrap thoughts or ideas Nakidai has in his own mind, so we can't fully determine the answer to this. It's definitely something interesting to think about though. We then get a flashback sequence to the murder Alice committed. This scene drastically differs from how his murder actually played out, where he pushed Midori off of a high balcony in a fit of rage. Instead, we find him and the future victim talking inside of a car. The victim, which we can deduce as Midori, starts off the scene by mentioning that someone named A-kun doesn't reply to him anymore. You'd think this would be Alice, but I have my doubts considering that they're sitting right next to each other in a car. Alice mentions how these two shouldn't be meeting up on off days, insinuating the fact that they're both in Samurai Yaiba. This would mean that Midori would have been hiding among the Samurai Yaiba band members at some point, unless the victim is someone else besides Midori in this scene, but I highly believe it's Grinchman. Alice tries exiting the car, but the victims lock the doors. He starts choking, but it's never said what causes him to. I suspect the victim is either choking him or the car is filling with gas. Given the following responses, I think it's the former. The victim explains how they're tired of being abandoned and worries Alice may do the same, but Alice asks if the two shall die together. The victim is taken back by this, but then says how they're relieved of it because they were afraid of dying alone. At this point, the victim starts gasping for air as Alice chokes them back, overpowering them, I assume, as the victim starts pleading for their life. But in that moment, it was Killer B killed for Alice. After this concludes, the flashback ends. Right before the scene where Kyutaro questions Ranger about the first floor and getting Kai's laptop back, Sarah wakes up in her room to find the wallet that held her clear chips to be gone, but the clear chips are still sitting there. She mentions how she forgot to lock the door, so someone came in and stole the wallet but not the chips, which is odd. In this case, the clear chips would seem more valuable, but maybe Sarah held some sort of special card in that wallet that someone else besides herself knew about? It seems odd, but since we don't have much further context, it remains a mystery. A small change from the scene where Reiko and Sarah go into the Room of Lies occurs when the beta has it so Reiko goes in by herself without Sarah. The dialogue is basically the same as the used lines though, only Reiko going in by herself would definitely make it easier for her to be switched with the fake doll, but that's really about all I can think of to this. Our final scene that we'll be covering today is a completely original one that Nakidai had scrapped. Here, we see So attempt to get Kai's laptop back from Rio Ranger, most likely after he confiscated it. That's where we get this unused CG that some of you may have seen already or not. This is the only unused scene of the chapters 1-1 to 2-1 that has an unused CG to go along with it. So and Ranger look relatively normal here. In this unused scene, Ranger is referred to as Noel, most likely due to a translation error. It starts off with So going to attack Ranger from the shadows, but Ranger dodges him. Ranger explains how picking up objects from previous floors is against the rules, but So retaliates by saying that such rules shouldn't exist. This is a callback to his first trial, where he got a rundown of the rules and such from Miley. Ranger playfully replies by saying he made it up on the spot. In this unused story, it appears that Safalin would have let the cast have the laptop from the beginning, but Ranger mentions how that seemed too generous and also pointed out how it would make it seem as though she was on the same side as the participants. So stays silent before going for another attack with the knife. A cracking is heard, and then it's shown that Ranger had used the laptop as a shield against the knife. It's also revealed how the knife So was using is the one Kai had used on himself from the first floor's kitchen. Ranger explains how that's an illegal item, and that because he's in possession of it, So will be punished. Basically saying that he'll be killed for it. So mentions how Ranger is a loser and a puppet, just like himself, which prompts Ranger to start laughing maniacally. Silence follows for a few lines, when Ranger finally breaks up by taking off. Before he does, he leaves So with the statement of, and I quote,
"I quite like beanies. I'll go ahead and make a reservation."
This raises the question, was So actually supposed to die here? And was Ranger supposed to acquire his beanie? Either way, I'd love to see Ranger try on the shiny beanie. That's all the scenes we'll be covering today. I'll be going over the unused scenes of chapters 2-2, 3-1, and maybe even Your Time to Shine, as there are some unused assets for that too in a later video. For now though, that's it for this one. Leave a like if you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. See you later, and adios.